Algebra 1. I'm going to be covering Chapter 10-6 of Trigonometric Ratios. There are three different trigonometric ratios. There's sine, cosine, and tangent. These are the three big ones. This is probably the only time you'll ever see me write this whole thing out. Usually you'll see me going, abbreviations for that, like sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, tangent is opposite over adjacent. It's usually the way you'll see me write it. And this all has to do with right triangles. This only works for right triangles. And a right triangle is one that has a 90-degree angle. We put a little box there to show it's a 90-degree angle. You can also identify it. It looks like the corner, corner of a piece of paper, for example. So whenever we're looking at this, they have to tell you which angle it's in reference to, or you will have to figure it out one of the two. So if I put that little X in there, that means that's this angle we're looking at. And now I can identify my sides. You can find the hypotenuse really easy because the hypotenuse is one of two things. It's across from the right angle. So if you make that box and then put an arrow, make it an arrow, that will tell you which side. Okay, so we're looking at figuring out which side of the triangle you have. All right, now they have to give you one of the angles. Okay, and it's in this case they gave me the X, and from there I'm trying to figure out which side of the triangles I have. So you have to be able to identify them. So the first one is, if I take this right angle, which is this one with the 90 degrees, that's implied, and that's what that little box means, is that it's 90 degrees. If I make an arrow out of that, or look for the side that's opposite that, it'll point out the hypotenuse. Now the hypotenuse is a few things. It's always opposite the right angle, and it's always the longest side of the triangle as well, okay? Some kids say that you can see it's at an angle. The other two make a 90-degree angle. That's one way you might be able to identify it. But anyway, that's the hypotenuse. Once you know the hypotenuse, then I usually look at where's the opposite side. So that has to do with which angle you're looking at. In this case, we're looking at that X, and the side that's opposite it is farthest away. So it's that side over there. Adjacent means next to. All right, not in front of or behind, it's next to. So you can see that the adjacent side is next to the X, and it's not the hypotenuse. So it's important that you be able to identify those three sides, okay? And we'll get a little more practice with it throughout this video. Now, if I was to switch the X to a different angle, then the adjacent and the opposite would switch. The hypotenuse doesn't change, though, because that's always the one that's opposite the right angle, okay? Also, these three things, sine, cosine, tangent, that's what these three things are. That's the way you say them. It's not sin. Sin is what you do on your own time. Sine is what we do in math, okay? And, I'm not going to say cosine. It's cos is cosine. Tan is tangent, okay? That's what those stand for. Now, the first problem I'm going to look at is really pretty much of a calculator problem. And it's the sine of 55. So if you take your calculator and you either hit SIN or sometimes you hit the 55 first and then the SIN. In this calculator, I do it that way. I hit 55 and then hit sine. It gives me the answer, which is it's decimal. And we always go 4 numbers after the decimal point. It's important to go 4. Otherwise, you'll get not as exact answer as you should. So I get 0.81915. So 0.81915. So since I'm rounding, looking at that 5, I'll round the 1 to a 2, all right? And that's the answer, okay? If you don't have a scientific calculator, you should probably go get one. They're about $10. Maybe sometimes you can find one cheap for like 2 or 3, but it should have SIN, COS, tangent, those functions on there, okay? If you can't get one of those, see me in class. I'll give you a table, which is a piece of paper, and I can show you how to use that as well. But I'm not going to be doing that in this video just for the sake of time. See me in class for it. All right. For now, you could certainly, use the online calculator, Desmos, and that will do some of the basic calculations for you until you see me in class. All right. So also, you want to make sure your calculator is in the right mode. This is all going to be in degrees, which means there's that little circle around there sometimes. It means degrees, which is there's different ways to measure angles, just like there's different ways to measure temperature outside, like Celsius and Fahrenheit. We're in just degrees for this video. If you type in sine of 55 and you're getting negative 0.999755, you're in the wrong mode. You're in radians, which means you got to get your calculator, switch over to degrees. So you can either figure it out on your own or bring it into class. I'll be happy to figure it out for you, show you, okay? It's usually an easy thing, just pushing one button or two. All right, so anyway, back to this. So cosine 27. This calculator hit the 27 and then the cosine. Some calculators hit the cosine, then the 27, and then equals. But you get 0.8910, and that's the answer, okay? So those are a couple of quick, easy problems for you. Now this one, you're looking at write the trigonometric ratio for the sine of A. Okay, so they gave us A, which is right over here, so they told us which angle we're looking at. Now, the way I usually like to do this is, if I take sine, that's the opposite over the hypotenuse, okay? And you're welcome to look back at your sheet, talk about whether you're supposed to memorize those formulas or not. It might be different in different classes, but anyway, that's what the sine is. Now the angle always goes right in where the x is, okay? The angle always goes there. So I get the sine of this case, angle A. And now I have to identify the sides of the triangle. So if I go over here, that one's the opposite. This one's the hypotenuse because it's opposite the right angle, which leaves this one being the adjacent, okay? Now I'm only looking actually at the opposite and the hypotenuse here because that's what the sine is. So if I plug those numbers in, the opposite is the 5 and the hypotenuse is the 13. And for that problem, that's all they're asking for, just the ratio, okay? And if you have questions on that, please bring it to class. Next, write the tangent ratio for tangent of C. Okay, so sometimes they put the angles on the outside of the triangle like this one. If you don't like that, you can put it on the inside there and then go from there. Now, if you look back at your three ratios, the tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. So I'm going to figure out which side is which here. Once again, if there's no right angle, put it in there. That's the corner of a piece of paper, which makes it about 90 degrees. Therefore, this is the hypotenuse. Now, the opposite side is going to be opposite the angle C. That's OPP. Yeah, you know me. And I got this 5 is the adjacent thing because that's the only one that's left. The adjacent, notice how it's next to the C, but it's not the hypotenuse, okay? Now let me fill in the values. I get the tangent of C equals the opposite, which is 12, over the adjacent, which is 5, and that is the answer. Okay, there we go, moving right along. Number 5. So here we're actually going to solve this, okay? I wrote down the three ratios here because we're going to do that in a moment or two. I wrote down steps back there, but I'll come to those in a minute. Okay, so the first thing I like to do when I do this is I want to identify my sides, okay? With regards to the 60 degrees, which side is the x? With regards to the 60 degrees, which one's the 18? So I can tell right away that that one's the hypotenuse. It's opposite the right angle. And the x is opposite the 60, which makes it the opposite side. Now, you got to figure out which of the three ratios to use. So I'm looking for the one, only one of those ratios will have opposite and hypotenuse in it. And in this case, it's the sine, okay? Notice how that's the only one with opposite and hypotenuse. The adjacent has the cosine has the adjacent and the hypotenuse. The tangent has the opposite and the adjacent, which leaves me just with the sine. So let me take that one, and I'm going to write down the sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. And now I'm going to fill in the values. So the 60 goes in for the x. The opposite is the x, and the hypotenuse is the 18, okay? All right, now, the sine of 60, that's a decimal. You can punch that into your calculator, and you get 0.8660, right? And that is the sine of 60. equals x over 18. All right. Now I'm going to solve this. All right. In order for me to solve this, I got that denominator. I want to get rid of that denominator of 18. Remember, fraction is division. The opposite of dividing by 18 is multiplying by 18, which leaves me with x. And over here, when I go 0.8660 times 18, I get 15.6. Okay, and that's going to be my answer. All right. Number 6. So let me write down. These are the steps that I think could be helpful if you get stuck on these. First, I like to identify the sides of the triangle. Second, I like to determine whether to use sine, cosine, or tangent. 3, I like to fill in the values and the ratios. Okay, and then fourth thing is solve the equation. So you should write those down. You should probably find those helpful. All right, number 6. So this one, I'm going to follow those steps up there. First is I'm going to identify the sides of the triangle. Okay, so I got the 50. Where's the hypotenuse? That's usually an easy place to start. Oop, there's the hypotenuse. Good, good. Let's see. Where's the opposite side? There's opposite from the 50. And the y, therefore, must be the adjacent. Okay, so I'm going to erase the opposite because there's no value there. There's the y and the 12 are the two I'm going to be working with. So if you go back up to those 3 ratios, I'm looking for the only one with the adjacent and the hypotenuse in it. The adjacent and the hypotenuse would be this one, which is cosine. So I'm going to write down cosine of x equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Cosine of x equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And I'm going to fill in the values, okay? So 50 goes in where the angle is for x. Y is the adjacent. And the denominator is the hypotenuse, which is 12. All right, now I'm going to solve this. I'm going to go cosine of 50 is 0.6428 if I round off slightly. Equals y over 12. All right, now I got to get rid of that denominator, solve for y. That's really y divided by 12. The opposite of dividing by 12 is multiplying by 12. Those cancel, and when I punch in my calculator, 0.6428 times 12, I get 7.7, and that's the answer. Okay. All right, so next, my last problem is actually a you try. I'm going to leave you with this one. You should do this on your own and take some notes on it and do it out and show me what your answer is in class. And I'll start with that later. All right, take care. I'm going to close out with a little music. Bye-bye.